A lot of the research evidence suggests that we need to consider really a landscape scale if we're promoting biodiversity, and it's the presence of semi-natural and natural habitats in the wider landscape around the farm that may be very important in delivering biodiversity that provides the service. And that leads to a problem because this might involve land use changes occurring beyond the boundaries of a particular farm. And so we need to think about policies that maybe encourage collective action, maybe encourage an element of landscape planning. And clearly in landscapes where land is in private ownership, this is very difficult to achieve. There are a number of interesting initiatives that are being tried if we think particularly about countries such as the Netherlands. The Netherlands developed a national ecological network approach in which the state sought to strategically purchase agricultural land in order to create new areas of natural habitat. And we were talking quite an ambitious plan here where the amounts of land involved in this national ecological network was something like 7% of the land area of the Netherlands. I think that's about 14% of their agricultural land. I think the policy's gone a little bit out of fashion in the Netherlands, and now they've moved more towards the idea, rather than the state purchasing land for conservation to create new areas of habitat, the focus has shifted more towards rewarding farmers for carrying out biodiversity measures within their own farmland. So there's been a change of policy there. But that gives us one approach, one landscape scale approach. We're seeing in our own country, in the UK, soon the introduction of incentivisation for cooperative applications to environmental schemes, where maybe a particular agri-environmental measure is being applied at the scale of a catchment or over a larger area beyond the bounds of a specific farm. So clearly there are a range of techniques that are available to farmers and groups of farmers in order to deliver sustainable intensification, to try and maximise production in existing areas of farmland. But we need maybe to consider some of the global issues if we are to move towards sustainable agriculture. Agriculture centuries ago was quite a closed system, so food was produced on land adjacent to the population in the village. It was consumed in the village, and maybe the byproducts were used back in the agricultural system, so the waste would have been recycled, animal manures and so on. We live in a world now where food might be produced in one part of the world, it may be transported and consumed in another part of the world, and then the waste products may be transported to a third area. And so we've got a widening of system boundaries in the sense now that system boundaries are pretty much global. And so we're moving nutrients and energy resources around at a global scale. And really, if we're going to think about sustainable systems, maybe we need to bring those system boundaries back in and recognise that a sustainable system may be one where there is more recycling, local reuse of those important resources. Another consideration, of course, is the role of the consumer and how consumers make informed choices. So there's been a development, if you like, of environmental branding, environmental awareness amongst consumers. So particular products now might be flagged up because they've been grown in a particular environmentally friendly way. I guess the extreme example of that might be organic produce, where consumers are buying in to a particular set of values that might relate not only to environmental production, animal welfare, but also might relate to human health concerns. And so there are issues there about how we can communicate messages about sustainability to the population. There's also a growing awareness that maybe the components of our diet may not have the best environmental footprint. So there's been a lot of debate recently in the media about the environmental footprint, particularly of meat consumption. And so if we look at the areas of land needed to produce a kilogram of protein as a meat product, it's several times greater than the area of land needed to produce a kilogram of protein via a plant product. So there are some big issues there, I think, for society in terms of choices about foods if we are to be serious about addressing this issue of the environmental impact of agriculture. In addition to maybe changing agricultural practices to achieve sustainable intensification, we need to remember that there are likely to be very significant technological advances that might give us another tool to increase yields on the same land area. So we're talking here about advances in breeding. Obviously genetic modification is one of those, but there are also some very important techniques such as marker-assisted breeding that are being used very extensively now and achieving good increases in yield. And then there are things that relate to the efficiency of nutrient use and resource use in general, so water use. Again, some of that relates to breeding, but also technologies such as precision farming, the ability to use spatial data to apply inputs where they're needed and when they're needed. So I see some big gains to be had there. And finally, there are some gains to be had in terms of our understanding of the dynamics of pests and diseases, and particularly how those interact, for example, with the climate. So our ability to forecast climate over the short to medium term now probably gives us better tools in terms of predicting when particular diseases and pests might be likely to happen. And again, that can lead to targeting of particular inputs in a more efficient and a more sustainable fashion.